It is the month of Adar. We're a bit late this month. We had a little bit of a technology snafu, and thank God that issue, I think, has been resolved. I hope it's been resolved, but it's almost halfway through the month. Of course, Adar, we have the great festival of Purim, and today is the day before Purim, which if you look at your calendar, it's called Tanis Esther or Tanis Esther, Tanit Esther. Everyone will pronounce it differently, but it's a fast day. And now it's 4 p.m. Houston time, and it's an hour later in Cincinnati. So both me and Rabbi Botnick are totally famished, and our voices are parched, and we're just fantasizing about food because we've been fasting all day. But that's okay. But I want to give you a little warning, a little disclaimer that I'm probably not bringing my A game here today. But Rabbi Botnick, even when he is with half his brain tied behind his back, even when he is famished and he is hungry and he is thirsty and he is cranky, he still will deliver top performance, I am sure. Is that right, Rabbi Botnick?
I highly doubt it. I've never tried it, but I highly doubt it.
Well, it does keep your mind off the food, so that will help, I guess.
Well, as it happens, a lot of this year is about fish, so I'm just going to be thinking about fried fish or salmon.
Well, it won't cause any problems for me, as you know. This is not going to be any problems for me because, as the audience knows, I'm not a fan of fish. Now, I want to make a quick note before we begin. Our mutual sister-in-law, Tova, she complained to me. She says, when you and Shmuly do your podcast, it's way too formal. I say Rabbi Botnick and you say Rabbi Wolbe. Dispense with the formalities. Just call each other Shmuly and Yaakov, and it's Tova's will. And we know what happens to those who disagree with Tova. We don't want to be there, and she's going to be so mad at me for mentioning this, but maybe she does have a point. What do you say about that, Shmuly?
I guess so, Yaakov. All right, anything for Tova, just this once.
Okay, we'll see. I might lapse into Rabbi Botnick territory, but maybe that's a good policy going forward.
All right, then. I'll just call you Rabbi Yaakov.
Listen, it's fine. Call me Yaakov, Rabbi Yaakov. Either one is fine. But I just wanted to note that, and I know she'll be very mad at me for mentioning this. So we'll get some flack for that.
All right, then. Shall we? Shall we jump into it? Okay, so it's the month of Adar. As you mentioned, we're a little late. It's actually almost Purim, a couple hours. But I think something that really isn't discussed, strangely, I haven't seen it even in the earlier works, is the Shevet, the tribe that is aligned with the month of Adar. And that is, interestingly enough, Naftali. So, Yaakov, Rabbi Yaakov, what do you even know about Naftali?
Very speedy. That's all I could think of. It was very fast compared to a deer, but not much about the tribe of Naftali.
Right. Okay, so we're going to try to take a deep dive into Naftali. I also did not know anything about him previously. I still don't. I just kind of formulated my own ideas. Moving along, this is very common knowledge, which is the zodiac sign for the month of Adar is, this is probably the most well-known, is fish, right? Mazel Adar Dagim. The sign for Adar is fish. It's even quoted, I believe, in the Gemara itself, that Haman chose the month of Adar because he felt like just as a big fish swallows a small fish, so too it will be an auspicious time for me, the big fish, to swallow the Jewish people, which he considered to be small fish. So the month of Adar is fish. All right, so what do we know? We know Naftali and we know fish.
Yes.
All right, so we have Naftali and we have fish. But here's what's cool. What's cool is that Naftali and fish actually come together. And that is, there is a verse in Devarim, towards the end of the Torah, where it says, Yam Vidarom Yerusha. Rabbi Wolbe, do you know where exactly that verse is?
This is Devarim, chapter 33, verse 23. This is at the end of Moshe's life. The very last day of his life, he gives a blessing to each one of the tribes. And to the tribe of Naftali, he says in this verse, Naftali seva ratzon umalei berkas Hashem yam vidarom yirasha.
Right. So this is talking to Naftali. And what is, Rabbi Woli, what is the simple translation of those words?
Seva ratzon. Seva means to be satiated. I think that's what it means, right? Ratzon means will or desire. So he's satiated with will. I guess that's the simple translation. And he's full. He's replete with the blessing of Hashem. Yam. So Yam is west, and Darom is south. Yerusha, he will inherit. That's how I would translate just the word for word.
Right. Okay. And that is the simple translation. The Targum Yonasan ben Uziel, who often veers off of the simple translation of the verse and gives you a deeper insight, he writes, and Rabbi, if you have a chumash in front of you, you can read it to me because I'm ad-libbing here, but I know that he writes the words, V'chadei benune yama, and Naftali will rejoice with the fish of the sea. All right, so before we even begin to understand that, here's what I see. I see that Naftali is intricately related to fish. And also I see that Naftali is rejoicing with this fish. And as we all know, the famous edict of the Gemara, Mishenechnas Adar marbim besimcha, right? We're supposed to be happy in the month of Adar. So here I see happiness, fish, and Naftali all coming together. What do you say to that?
This is a good setup. We have a month that a lot is happening in this month. It's a month of great joy and festivities. It's a month that's associated with fish, much to my consternation, as you know. It's associated with the tribe of Naftali, and Naftali is supposed to be happy with fish. At least that's the translation of the Yonasan ben Uziel translator on the Torah, on the verse that Moshe applies to the tribe of Naftali.
Right. Okay, so this is all way above my head, but we're going to try and figure something out. I want to move away from the Naftali topic and just ask two very general questions. One is in the, I don't even know what you would call it. It's not a prayer. It's something we recite after Megillah. It's a song, right? Shoshanas Yaakov. In there, you find a terminology, techeiles Mordechai. Virosam yachad techeiles Mordechai, right? Now,
yes.
Rabbi Woli, I know that the topic of techeiles is very near and dear to your heart.
As it should be to anyone who wants to fulfill the Almighty's mitzvos, yes, but go ahead.
Yeah, well, I hate to say it, but techeiles come from a fish, so you're kind of
proceed.
In a quagmire there. So the techeiles Mordechai, what on earth is the techeiles Mordechai? What are we referring to? Mordechai was wearing techeiles?
It's very mysterious.
He was, but very mysterious. Okay, final question is, and I have no idea if I have the right to ask this question. I am not a linguist, certainly not a Hebrew linguist. It says vina hafochu, right? That it reversed, right? That's the whole story. It was a story of reversal, the Purim story. And I don't know. I'm gonna turn to you, Rabbi Wolbe. Is the word vina hafochu? Would that be your choice way of phrasing it, or would it be like v'hafochu? Like, what's that extra nun? Doesn't nun connote like we did this together?
Interesting. So in the book of Esther, which is the book that we read on Purim, which is the book that chronicles the Purim story and miracle, when it talks about the great miracle that happened, it says that everything was the opposite. You know, the Haman builds this gallows and he's going to hang Mordechai, but no, actually, Haman himself gets hung on said gallows. Oh, and all the Jews are going to be killed by their enemies? Actually, no, their enemies will be killed by the Jews. So that's a verse in the book of Esther, chapter 9. And you say that grammatically, it should not say v'nahapochu. It should say something else. Nahapoch means like we turn things on its head. We inverted things. It should say v'hafochu. It was the opposite. Okay, that's a linguistic question. It's more of an exotic question, but I'm buying it. I will see where you take us with this idea. Rabbi Botnick, also known as Shmuly.
All right, yeah. I'm going to try to answer the question, assuming that it's a question. All right, now we're going to take a huge leap here
Mm-hmm.
and jump into something that is entirely Kabbalistic. I have no idea what it means, but we're going to try anyways. And this is in a work called Beis Olamim from the very, very great Kabbalist, Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac Chaver. He was a very great Kabbalist. So I'm going to read to you a couple of sentences here. Let me know what you think about them. So he's referring to the techeiles, Rabbi Wolbe, once again, one of your favorite topics. He writes like this. V'gav nadila, its color, nafik michad nuna, comes from one fish. Okay, I'm going to skip a couple of words here. Heim nikra nuna yama. All right, this is called the fish of the sea, right? Nuna yama, Rabbi Wolbe, those words just sound familiar. You just read them to me in the Targum Yonasan ben Uziel, v'chadei benuna yama, right? So the techeiles comes from this nuna yama. V'hu sod nun de noflim. And this is the secret of the nun of noflim. V'hu azal b'yam kineres. And it swims in the kineres. Okay, so here's what I see. The techeiles comes from a fish that swims in the kineres. And this is the secret of the nun of noflim. Okay, so we see from Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac Chaver that there is this fish that swims in the kineres. And now the kineres was in the tribal portion of Naftali. Is that correct, Rabbi Wolbe?
Yes, the verse says so explicitly in the book of Joshua, 19:35.
All right, so kineres is in the portion of Naftali. So already we know that the kineres is going to be somewhat Adar related because Naftali is associated with Adar. And this fish swims there and the techeiles comes from it. And so already what we're seeing is a bunch of more pieces come together. So Naftali and fish we already knew were connected because of the Targum Yonasan ben Uziel, right? V'chadei benuna yama, which was connected to Adar simply because we know that Adar is fish and Adar is happiness. And now we're seeing that techeiles is also coming into the picture because we know that techeiles comes from this fish that swims in the kineres that is in the portion of Naftali. How does all that sound?
A lot of moving parts here, but there's obviously they're all connected.
Right, now I will point out one question, which I'm sure is percolating in your mind, and that is that the Gemara Megillah, I know, says that the techeiles comes from the chila zone, which is actually in the tribal portion of Zevulun. So that is a good question, and I've seen that question asked. I saw different answers. Some of them were Kabbalistic. Some of them explain that what this idea that there's techeiles coming from the kineres means it means in a more mystical sense. But either way, that's what it says. Now, Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac Chaver also said that this fish, which is called nun, right? A fish in the Aramaic word for fish is nun. That's also the secret of the nun de noflim, the nun that falls. Now, what he's alluding to is that in Ashrei is arranged alphabetically. So you have Aleph all the way through Taf. Each verse begins with one letter. But the only one that's missing is Nun. And the reason for that, the Gemara tells us, is because the word Nun stands for Noflim, which means the word Noflim means those who fall. And we don't want to, that's very negative. We don't want to begin a verse with a negative implication. And later in the next verse it says, Somech Hashem l'chol hanoflim, that God will erect, God will uplift all those who fell. So we skip the part of the noflim and we go directly to the phase where God is actually lifting up those who fell. Okay, so here's what we know about this fish. It swims in the kineres, the techeiles comes from it, and it is connected with the idea of falling, of noflim. Now, what I thought to be interesting was, again, we know that this fish is going to have something to do with Naftali because it is swimming in the kineres, which is in Naftali's portion. But it struck me that the word Naftali, if you rearrange the letters, spells nafalti, which means I fell. So here would be another connection, another dot to add in this very complicated puzzle, that Naftali is also perhaps associated with the idea of falling, nafalti. And so again, he would be the fish, he would be the kineres, the techeiles, and now the falling. Rabbi Wolbe, are we on board?
Yeah, there's so many moving parts here, but let me try to assemble them over here. We know the month of Adar is associated with the tribe of Naftali. We know that the mazel, the zodiac sign, is fish. We know that this is a month of great gladness and joy. And we see these ideas all intersecting together. So when we read about the blessing that Moshe gives to Naftali, the Targum Yonasan, again, written by one of the authors of the Mishnah, so it's very ancient, and it's very credentialed, very reputable. He says that when it says that when the secret behind Moshe's blessing to Naftali was that he'll be happy with the fish. Again, Naftali, happiness, and fish. And that is also associated with the Kinneret, with the Sea of the Galilee, which is in the tribal portion of Naftali, which has this fish, again, the same fish, the fish that produces techeiles, the special color that goes to make wool blue, and somehow I assume that's going to be connected with techeiles Mordechai, with that unusual stanza, the unusual verse in the prayer that we say, in the song that we say after the reading of the Megillah, and the nun, that nun, which is the Hebrew, the Aramaic word for fish, is also the letter that's missing from the Ashrei, and that is connected, we're told by this great Kabbalist, Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac Chaver, it's connected to techeiles and to this Kinneret and this fish, and you're telling me it's also the same letters as Nafalti, I fell, and Naftali is the same letters rearranged. That's what I have hitherto.
Okay, now let's try to move on. What is the gematria of the letter Nun? Sorry for putting you on the spot, Rabbi Wolbe.
This is much easier. It's number 50. 50. Nun is 50.
50. Right. So 50 is a very fascinating number. We know 50 is associated with the Yovel, right? I'm sure you discussed this in Parshas Bahar on your podcast, how you have the Shemitah cycle where every 7 years we observe Shemitah, but then there's 7 Shemitahs, which lead, right, that would be 7 times 7 is 49, leading to the 50th year, which is Yovel. And Yovel, there's like a complete cessation of just the way the world interacts. And anything anyone ever purchased from a different tribe reverts back to the original tribe. Whatever the laws are, the idea is there's just kind of the world stops in a sense. Right? Well, remember, you're old enough to remember Y2K, right? Year 2000. There was this fear that the whole world would just like fall apart. That's kind of
I think I had just turned 13. So.
Oh, well, you were older than I was. I was in 4th grade. I was, I think, 9.
Yeah, well, you should listen to me for wisdom, sagacity.
Anyways, but yeah, so Yovel is kind of like the biblical version of Y2K, had Y2K actually panned out. But that's what the number 50 is. Okay, now.
Well, the canonical example of that is, of course, the Jewish bondsman who opts to stay longer after their 7-year period has, or the 6 years, then the 7th year they get sent free. In the event that they choose to extend that, then they get pierced in their ear by the doorpost, by the mezuzah, and they work forever. La'olam, forever. Rashi says it means to Yovel, because the whole world kind of essentially has a complete reset every 50 years.
Right. Okay, now, probably I would argue one of the most mysterious parts of the Torah. Now, that's a big claim to make because there's a lot of mysterious parts of the Torah, but at least to me, is in Parshas Ba'aloscha, the inversed, is that the word? The inversed nuns, the backward nuns. Rabbi Wolbe, do you know what I'm talking about?
I think I do, yes. It's a very unusual feature that you find in the Torah scroll, that you have almost like brackets, like parentheses in middle of the actual Torah scroll, bracketing out 2 verses in Parshas Ba'aloscha. I think it's chapter 10 of Numbers, something like that. Yes, but it's backwards facing nuns, like mirror image nuns.
Right,
letter nun.
Nuns, exactly.
Yeah, so it's a letter in the Torah scroll that's not part of a word. It seems like it's this extra letter, and 2 of them on either side of 2 verses, which the Talmud, I believe, or the Midrash tells us that it's a break separating the two verses from the other parts of the book of Numbers, because it's really another book. In effect, the book of Numbers is 3 books. You have before those double nuns, but double inverted nuns, and you have afterwards, and you have those 2 verses which constitute their own book. And
right.
thus, they're the Pentateuch is not really the Pentateuch; it's the Septateuch. That's not 5 books of Moses; it's 7.
Exactly. And I don't have the Chumash in front of me, but you know what those verses are in between those 2 inverted nuns?
I'll open up the book here for you.
Exactly.
Given that we really didn't prepare.
Just the general gist is that it's the traveling, the journeying of the Aron, right?
Yes. Okay, I just found it. It's actually we got it right, chapter 10, verses 35 and 36. It's about the traveling of the ark, what they said when the ark would journey. Arise, Hashem, and let your enemies be scattered, and let those who hate you flee from before you. And when it rested, and when the ark rested, because they had to obviously disassemble and reassemble the ark along their journey. So when they left, he would say the following in verse 35, what we said earlier, the aforementioned. And in verse 36, we read about what Moshe would say when it rested. Shuva Hashem rivos alfei Yisrael, reside tranquilly, Hashem among the myriads and thousands of Israel. And then you have the other backwards facing, really it's more than that, it's backwards facing and upside down. So inverted, I think it's the correct word. Inverted nuns.
Right, and which are called in Hebrew the nun hafuchos. Now, before I even say anything, you already kind of know where I'm going with this, because remember, we asked at the beginning, v'na hafochu, why is there a nun there? So where I'm headed is, I'm going to try to argue that it has something to do with these nun hafuchos, right? There's a nun, that's hafuch, that's backwards. Anyways, regarding these nun hafuchos, I want to read to you a few sentences from Rabbeinu Bachaye, who was a Rishon, also often dabbles in the esoterica.
One of the great medieval commentators.
That's right. And he discusses
because Shmuly, I hate to say, you say Rishon, a lot of people don't know what that means. Rishon's in Hebrew. So I say, I help fill in, my role here is I'm kind of the useful idiot here.
Yeah, no.
This podcast would be so much better. It would be so much better if we weren't fasting. Oh
I
man,
know, my mind is totally shot right now. I hope people listen to this on Purim when they're deeply intoxicated.
It's best served with
exactly, best served with one. Anyways, it says he's talking about these nuns, and he says that the nun is referring to this idea of 50, this cessation of just of nature, essentially. And he says that when the nun is inverted, it's like an absolute. It's like even more intense. It refers to like an absolute, complete, like decimation of nature. I'm trying to find you the exact words.
Now the pedantics will quibble that the word decimate only means 10%, but let them quibble. There's plenty of meat in the bone here to quibble with.
He says, "Umashabaha nun hafucha ki kashem she michtav haos betikuno kiro mora al kiyum davar." When you have a letter that is written forwards, it connotes existence, because I guess the whole of existence comes from the letters of the Torah. But when it's inverted, that's like a destruction of sorts, because the world is built with the letters of the Jewish alphabet, and the world gets destroyed when you reverse those letters. So the letter Nun already, before it's inverted, already has some sort of connection to the idea of bittul, to the idea of like annulment. Once it's inverted, it's like an absolute annulment. Does that make sense? I don't fully understand it, but that's what he says.
Yeah, well, the way I understand what you read is that if you have a letter that's facing the opposite direction, it's the kind of the complete opposite of the fulfillment of the meaning of that word. So if nun, well, I'm giving some commentary here, but if nun symbolizes this idea of a cycle, you have 50 and then another 50 and another 50 and so on, maybe the nun facing the other direction, it's like this total nullification of this whole system.
Now, the one thing I don't understand is how he says that. And afterwards, there's this other inverted nun, which is to tell you that there will be a recreation once that phase of annulment is over. He says,
I'll tell you, that's what it means. It's the opposite of the annulment. It means if you have first the annulment of the ordinary existence, and then the annulment of the annulment. It's like two negatives makes a positive.
Oh, that's really cool. Okay, very clever. All right.
Shmuly, I feel like it was so late in the month. We should have just recorded it when we're drunk anyhow. And then at least we have an excuse.
Listen, it's always good to downgrade your quality every once in a while so people can appreciate the quality when it's not like that.
That just assumes that they're coming back, right? Yeah. It has to be tolerable enough that they're still willing to come back.
All right. I think I have faith in our listeners. I think they'll be back when it's not a fast day. So let's not schedule the next one for Shavas or B'Tammuz or something like that.
Or Tisha B'Av.
All right, but let's get him on. So, all right, so you got these two inverted nuns. Now, here's my question. So why all of a sudden, why out of the blue are we alluding to this idea of this annulment of nature, this complete cessation of society? What's it doing there smack in middle of the book of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers? Why in the world is that happening? Rabbi Wolbe, do you have any thoughts on that? Or
it's very strange. It's very strange. In the middle of the narrative, it's talking about the ark, which of course is the most important, most central, most lofty of all the vessels of the temple. When the Jewish people had to move, so they would have to pack up and disassemble the tabernacle and carry everything. Of course, the ark had poles, staves on either side for easy transport. And this is what they would say. This is what Moshe would say when they began their movement of the ark and when they settled it. It seems very mysterious that these verses should be in a class of their own. They kind of symbolize the end of the previous world, and when they're done, then we could end the end of the previous world, or end the ending and begin anew. It is a great mystery.
Right. Now, I don't know that I will solve the mystery, but let's focus on the what instead of the why. What I do see is that when the Aron moves, that's a very dramatic thing. The whole world is affected by the fact that the ark is traveling, right? That's what it seems to say. That the moment that there is a Nesoa Ha'aron, Vayhi ben Soa Ha'aron, there's this fear that the entire world might collapse. And then ultimately we're told that it will, the world will return back to normal by that second inverted nun. So,
when the ark is in transport, everything else is suspended. Exactly. That's what's implied. Like the ordinary operations of the world are just not in effect during the time when the ark is in limbo, when it's being transported.
Now, regarding the ark, so the Hebrew word is Aron, which is spelled Aleph Resh Vav Nun. I've seen this in multiple places, but I think the most explicit is Rabbeinu Bache again. And there he says that the word Aron, he said it comes from the word Nora, which means awesome. Not awesome as it's used in the vernacular, but awesome meaning full of awe. It strikes
wondrous.
Wondrous. And the word Nora, which again means awesome, if you rearrange the letters, it will spell Aron. And he says because the Torah was placed in the Aron, and the Torah is Nora, the Torah itself is awesome. Therefore, it's called Aron. Now, why?
Both in the classic definition of the word and in the vernacular and the common usage.
Right.
Sorry
Right.
for disrupting your train of thought.
Yeah. Not on a fast day. What I don't understand about this, Rabbi Wolbe, is why wouldn't the ark just be called Norah? And why are you flipping the letters around? Okay, this I don't know. But here's the point. The point is that the Aron and the trait of Norah, the concept of Norah, is one and the same. Okay, now here is where things get kind of interesting. There's a very famous Gemara in Yuma, page 69b, which tells us that Moshe Rabbeinu referred to God as Hakel, God, Hagadol, the big, the great, Hagibor, the strong, Hanora, and the awesome. Okay, those were 4 appellations for God. Then it says that when the destruction of the temple happened, Yirmiyah, who was the presiding prophet over that era,
Jeremiah.
He said, Jeremiah, right? So he says, oh, 1 second. So what's important is that we've incorporated those words, which it comes from a verse in Deuteronomy, but we've incorporated it into our prayer, right? In Shemona Esrei, in the very first blessing, we say exactly these words. Hakel, Hagadol, Hagibor, Vanora. So Yirmiyah came along, this is a hard concept to understand, and he said, God, Aye no Rosav. We don't see your awesomeness. I have no idea if that's a word or not, but let's assume it is. We do not see your Norah. We don't see it anymore because the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. And so he stopped saying Norah. It sounds like they kind of removed that word from the liturgy. Then Asa Daniel Omar Nachrim Mishtabdim Bebanav, and he says Daniel, who is another prophet, he said similarly that the Nachrim, the non-Jews, have placed your children into servitude. Aye Gvu Rosav, where is your strength? And then Lo Amar Gibor. He stopped saying Gibor. Okay, so it used to say Hakel, Hagadol, Hagibor, Vanora. They took out Norah, they took out Gibor, and just says Hakel, Hagadol. Then the Anshe Knesset Gedola came around, and they said,
Men of the Great Assembly.
Men of the Great Assembly. Anshe Knesset Gedola. Adarabba. On the contrary, Zuhi Gvuraso Shekovish Esitzro Ve'elu Heinarosav Shalmale Moro Shal Kadosh Baruch Hu Heich Uma'achas Yichol Eskem. Okay, basically what they say is no, we're going to reinstitute those words. Because within the seeming obscurity of the destruction of the temple and the exile of the Jewish people, within that we can see God's strength and God's Norah, God's awesomeness, God's awe, I guess. Because if not for God's strength, and if not for his awe, he would not be able, I mean, hard to say that about God, but he wouldn't be able to resist himself from punishing those who have hurt his people, and his people would not have been able to survive while in exile.
This is a fascinating Talmud, very fascinating Talmud. There was a series of descriptions that we gave to God going back all the way to the times of Moshe. Hakel, the God. Hagadol, the great God. Hagibor, the mighty God. Vahanora, and the awesome God. And that was the way we describe God for hundreds of years. Temples destroyed, and we see an apparent lack of awe. So Jeremiah, the prophet, he comes and he removes that term, that appellation. Daniel comes and says, well, we're being subjected to them here in Babylon. Where's the might of God? And thus that too was removed. And then the men of the Great Assembly, they come and they have a completely opposite take. They say, no. The fact that the nation experienced and underwent what they did is actually a testament to God's might and awesomeness, and they reinstituted those descriptions. And thus we have, even till today, in our prayers, we say these words, Hakel, Hagadol, Hadibor, Vanora. Amazing. Very interesting. Fascinating.
Yeah.
Awesome.
It is definitely fascinating. It's awesome. And all I want to take out of it is this. This is what I want to suggest. The Maharsha, okay, that is in Hebrew an Acharon, Rabbi Wolbe translate.
One of the later sages.
One of the later sages, meaning within the last 400 years, Yeah, I would say
about
like
400 years ago.
Yeah.
But widely recognized as one of the greatest commentators on the Talmud. In every standard edition of the Talmud, you will find the commentary of the Maharsha. Also noteworthy because he gave commentary not just on the halachic portions of the Talmud, but also on the agadic, the non-halachic portions of the Talmud as well. And he's basically the first place you go to when you read an agadic portion of the Talmud, such as the one that Shmuly just told us about. If this podcast is a bomb, I'm blaming Tova. That's what I'm doing. You showed insufficient reverence to Rabbi Botnick, and that's why it was a total disaster. But yes, so that's the Maharsha.
I think that this will be our most successul podcast yet.
Yeah, because like you said, everyone's going to be listening to it when they're drunk. So it's. So
here's what I want to say. The Maharsha says that if you track the timeline, so we know there was the destruction of the first temple, and the prophets of that era, they stopped saying, they discontinued to say Hakibar Vanora, and then it was reinstituted later on. He says, what does later on mean? He writes, and I think he brings more proof to this, but I don't have it in front of me, but the idea is, he says, it's referring to Mordechai. It's referring to the Purim story. When the Purim story happened, that's when they said, all right, you know what? We see God within the darkness. We're going to reinstitute the words Hakibar V'Hanora. So what I feel like is going on here is that the Purim story, the underlying current running throughout the Purim story is that this Gibor and Nora are starting to resurface. They disappeared. We stopped saying them. And now, all of a sudden, they begin to reappear. God's
might, God's awesomeness resurface in the Purim story.
Now, if the word Nora disappeared after the destruction of the first temple and reappeared, what does that mean? Does that not mean that the Nora, the word Nora, the theme of Nora, is in transit? That's what I want to suggest. In a philosophical sense, Nora is moving. It's moving from one place to another, from one era to another, maybe from one stratosphere to another. The concept of Nora is in transit. And as we know, Nora and Aron are the same thing. So just like when the Aron is being transported, there's this great fear of falling. There's these two nuns, these two inverted nuns, connoting some sort of cessation. So too, by the Purim story, really during that whole 70 years between the first temple and the second temple, which is when this story happened, there was a very great danger of nefila, of falling. Rabbi Wolbe, does that sound too outrageous?
Well, I love the genius, the sheer genius of it. That the Aron was in transit at various times, and then everything was up in the air, everything was in limbo, everything was frozen in place. What's going to be? There's no stability. The world as we know it stopped to exist. We have the backwards facing nun. Okay, once it relaxes, once it rests, once it's in place, it is secure. We could go back, or we could maybe go to the world as it was, or as it will be. And that Aron in the balance, that ark in the balance, is the same thing as the Nora, which is in the balance. And again, Nora and Aron, awesome, and ark are the same letters in Hebrew. And we have a period where the Nora was suspended, where comes along Jeremiah after the temple's destroyed and says, well, there's no Nora now. And it's restored 70 years later by the men of the Great Assembly. And during that period, during the interim period, it was akin to the ark in transit. The Nora was in transit, just as when the Aron is in transit, as bracketed by those reverse, upside down mirror image inverted nuns, so too the Purim story. And I see kind of how you're going to put this all together, with wonderful, Botnickian touch. But so too with the Purim story, we had the Nora in limbo, and now it's coming back to where it belongs.
Right, and remember how the Rabbeinu Bachai told us that there's those two inverted nuns. So the first one is the complete annulment, and the second one is the reversal of that. So ultimately, after we experience the danger, if we successfully carry through, and the Norah is successfully transplanted, so then we're able to invert that, and we come out, bigger and stronger than ever before. Now, throughout the Megillah, we do find the term Nephilah many times. If I could search it, I would right now, but I know, everybody tell me offhand, I know that the Nafal Pachad Mordechai is saying that the fear of Mordechai fell upon all the people. I know that it says that Haman fell upon the bed with Esther. I know that it says Hipel poor, when he cast the lots, it says that they fell. Hipel, it fell. I do believe there are others as well, Rabbi Wolbe. If any of them come to mind, you can let me know. Otherwise, I think we have enough to demonstrate this idea that Nephilah is a very real thing. It's almost like a central theme in the entire Megillah. Is this?
It's okay. It's okay to ballpark it. We could ballpark things over here on the podcast. It appears many times. Do the research. Well, read it.
Yeah. All right. Okay. But again, I think that lines up with what we're saying, that when the Norah is in transit, there's going to be a lot of Nephilah going on, right? The Nun stands for Nephilah, the inverted Nun. Now, the Aron, aside for corresponding to the concept of Norah, also corresponds to the Kisei HaKavod, God's throne of glory. I know this because the Purim, also an early commentator, tells us this. He writes that, interestingly, it says, Vayhi bin Soa ha'aron, and when the Aron is traveling, he says that the word bin Soa is Gematria Yaakov, because the face of Yaakov Avinu is engraved on the throne of glory. Have you ever heard of that, Rabbi Wolbe?
Which one? That it's a gematria, or that the face of Jacob?
No, I guess that his face is engraved on the throne of glory. That's well known.
That's well known. Never underestimate my ignorance, though.
No. I just meant this idea that the Aron is also somehow associated with that.
No, so it's new to me.
Right, so the ark is also somehow associated with the Kisei HaKavod.
The throne of glory
tells us.
Yes.
And he says that it's alluded to in the word bin Soa, which is the same gematria as Yaakov. So just to move along really quickly, we're gonna wrap it up soon. So the techeiles, remember, we want to get back to the techeiles. The techeiles, we all know the Gemara, and you certainly know because you're a big techeiles guru, which it says that techeiles doma liyam, yam doma Rekia doma le Kisei HaKavod. Is that how it goes?
Yes. The Talmud talks about why we are supposed to wear a techeiles cord by our tzitzis, by our fringes, the blue string, the blue fringe. And it says, when you see the tzitzis and you see the techeiles, the blue string, it will remind you of the ocean, of the sea, which looks like the heaven, and eventually you'll make your way to thinking about the throne of glory. So there's a through line connecting the techeiles all the way to the throne of glory.
Having said that, let's try to wrap everything together and answer all of our questions. We know that Adar has to do with fish, has to do with Naftali. That we already explained, that Naftali, the Kineres, is in his portion. We know that there's this mysterious fish that swims within the Kineres. And presumably that's the fish that Naftali and Adar are associated with. We are taught that the techeiles comes from that very fish. Okay. So all of that is starting to make a lot of sense. We are taught that this fish, which is called Nun in Aramaic, is somehow connected to the idea of the letter Nun, which means falling. And we explained that falling happens when the Aron / Norah is in transition. So just to back up for a minute, so the Norah is in transition because it was removed from the liturgy when the destruction of the temple happened, and now it is slowly starting to return during the Purim story. So because the Norah is in transition, therefore there's this threat of falling. It evokes this Nun. And ultimately, when ultimately, when we succeed to replace the Norah, so then we reverse the reversal, and we're able to return, bigger and stronger than ever before. Because the term Norah and the Aron are associated with the Kisei HaKavod, because the Aron and the Kisei HaKavod they correlate with each other. Therefore, because the Kisei HaKavod is the same color as the techeiles, right? The techeiles reflects the Kisei HaKavod. What I want to suggest is that the Purim story, which allows us to return to Norah, allows us to have a stronger connection to the Kisei HaKavod, which can come via the techeiles, because the techeiles is what represents the Kisei HaKavod in this world. Rabbi Wolbe, I sound confusing. Are you confused? If you are,
I'm a little confused, but I'm not sure if that's just the hunger, the lack of the coffee, the lack of anything to drink, and just the general physical malaise that I'm undergoing here, and I'm sure you are as well. But it makes a lot of sense, I think.
But basically what I'm saying is this techeiles Mordechai is because the techeiles is the reflection of the Kisei HaKavod. According to the whole theory that we're trying to put forward, we emerge from Purim more connected with the Kisei HaKavod than ever before, because the Norah returned, and the Norah is the Kisei HaKavod, because the Norah is the same thing as the Aron, and the Aron is aligned with the Kisei HaKavod. So when you're more connected with the Kisei HaKavod, you have more techeiles in your life. So that's why we say techeiles Mordechai. And that would be the explanation where vina hafuchu, the nun, is hafuch, because again, when you reach that point, when you successfully transport the Aron / the Norah, you reach that point of the nun hafuch, that reversed nun, right, that second reverse nun, which ultimately returns you back to where you were supposed to be.
Now, how would you say that this applies to the tribe of Naftali? Like, what's their quality?
Oh, that is a very, very good question.
And I'll tell you why I'm asking that. Because when you were talking about this, and again, I apologize for not doing more research about this. Maybe we should have. But I thought of the fact that there's one aspect of the tribe of Naftali, or the individual Naftali, that he's different than everyone else. Like, you asked me at the beginning, like, what's Naftali known for? I said, well, he was fast. Now, the reason why I say that, it's not just because he was compared to a deer, but because the Gemara says, the Talmud says, that when they were going to bury Jacob, so they brought him after a very long and elaborate cavalcade procession to the land, and they were about to inter him in that cave of the patriarch. And I'm pretty sure we've talked about this at some point. Esav was there. And Esav was trying to blockade and not allow the final burial spot there to be granted to Jacob. And they said, well, you sold the spot. You gave the spot. You forfeited your spot when you made the pile of the gold and all the silver and all the jewels and precious things that he earned in Padan Aram. He gave it that to you and you sold it. So by right, it belongs to Jacob. And he says, well, where's the contract? And they say, well, gosh, we left it in Egypt. So he says, well, show me the contract and I will allow you to bury Jacob here. And they said, okay, who's going to run back to Egypt? So they sent Naftali to run back to Egypt because he was the fastest. And he runs off. And as they're milling about waiting for Naftali to return, Jacob's grandson, the only son of Dan, Hushim, the deaf one, he doesn't realize what's going on. He's deaf, and they motion to him. They try to communicate to him. Well, this man is stopping Jacob from being buried. He grabs a sword, and he decapitates him. And they're able to bury Jacob, and of course, Esav's head rolls into the cave, right? That's a story. I believe we've talked about that because we spoke about the tribe of Dan. But it hit me that Naftali is the only one who wasn't present at the death of Esav. He was running to Egypt to try to extract the contract. So I'm just curious because we're talking here about the nation. This is the story of Purim. The story of Purim is overcoming Esav to some degree. Maybe there's something about the death of the original Esav and the overcoming of the successor, the Agagite successor of Esav, maybe the fact that Naftali, this is his month, and there's something about his story and his ancestral land that is represented in this month, maybe that's somehow connected, I was thinking, with the fact that the original time that Esav was destroyed and decapitated, Naftali was not present. That was my thoughts. I don't know how it connects, and my brain power is not quite.
I know how you thought of that on a fast day, Rabbi Botnick. That is really impressive. I certainly didn't intend that, and I'm very glad you brought it up.
No, but it can't be a coincidence, right? It can't be. Like
No,
there was some experience that the brothers and the whole family experienced when they were there. They were present. They were on the ground when Esav was decapitated. Naftali was not there. He was somewhere between Hebron, where this cave is, and Egypt. I don't know if he had already made it there and he already was heading back, or he was halfway there. We don't know, but he was not present because when they were waiting, that's when the decapitation of Esav happened. So I'm just curious to know, maybe if we're able to think about this a little bit more deeply after we have a few, after we're resuscitated, after the fast, get a coffee, get a croissant, have a little bit of chicken salad. Or I know you've been salivating over the fish that we've been talking about here. Get some hamantashen, and maybe we can figure out how this connects. But I think this is absolutely brilliant, and I really enjoyed it. I love the idea of the backwards-facing nuns. I don't know if you actually phrased it like this, but to me, the way I would phrase it is that there's a risk of nefila, a risk of falling when the stabilizing force of the Aron is in transit, is in limbo. And if you kind of turn the nuns and you freeze them in place, maybe that somehow staves off the nefila, which is, I don't know if you quite said it like that, but that's one of the ways that I kind of formulated it in my head. But a lot of fascinating ideas. And I'm going to give you, of course, the last word here to sign off on this very unusual, fast day special on the podcast.
Yeah, I'll sign off with an apology. I'm sorry, guys. I try to be better. It was a rough couple of weeks for me. A lot going on. And then my recorder went bust, so I wasn't even able to record. Till it was a fast day. I finally got my hands on a substitute recorder. Guys, hopefully Nissan will be better. Okay?
I wouldn't apologize. Listen, something definitely good came out of this. Because I'm looking at my recorder. It's been almost an hour since we started. We killed an hour. We're an hour closer to the end of the to the breakfast, so that's good.
All right. Well, at least that. Okay.
Well, if you have any complaints that you want to lodge against us for this half-baked, well, I don't know what's half-baked. I like it. I think it was really good, actually. I think it was one of the best ones. So I'm not going to take any flack. I'm going to defend Rabbi Botnick, Shmuly, all the way. So if you have any complaints, send them to me. If you have any praise, send them to botnicksm at gmail.com. Is that right?
That's right.
Well, everyone have a wonderful Purim, happy Purim, uplifting Purim. We should be elevated from the day and from the story, of course, and from this incredible and mind-blowing ideas that you shared. I absolutely love them, and I appreciate you coming on and sharing this wonderful wisdom with the podcast.
All right. All the best, everybody.